Right. Well, first of all, I want to thank him for being here, for coming to such a long way from, I think, from the United States, in fact. So he made a long tour in the West to the United States and to Europe. So very much welcome. I'm very happy to be able to have a conversation with someone who is a leader in Tibetan Buddhism. So what I would like to start with is talking about what is Tibetan Buddhism, how is Tibetan Buddhism different from Chinese Buddhism, Burmese Buddhism, Sri Lankan Buddhism, Indian Buddhism. Why do we see a religion like Buddhism as divided in national categories?
First of all, I am very grateful to Professor Van Beit. Please talk with me this time, if you don't mind, about Buddhism and science and related topics, etc., as well as exploring various other fields. At the same time, I also responded to he believes that among all religions in existence, we are discussing Tibetan Buddhism. The reason is that I myself study Tibetan Buddhism, but at the same time I'm also very interested in Hinduism, Christianity, and all the different religions around the world. I also know that every religion has its own teachings that promote goodness and moral upliftment, ways to help control desires, which brings significant benefits to humanity. But the main point we want to discuss here today is Tibetan Buddhism in the contemporary era. Today, why are there so many people, including the West and the Han regions, with a particularly large number of people studying Tibetan Buddhism? We are all in Tibetan culture frenzy, a wave of enthusiasm for Tibetan Buddhism. Some scholars in the East and West to discuss this important issue together with everyone, whether for society or for religion, this is meaningful. So this time we are specifically using this topic to explore the key points of Tibetan Buddhism and relevance to other religions.
Yeah, but I find an important question. I understand that there are some national characteristics just because of Buddhism growing in a particular kind of environment. So it grows in Tibet and then also takes on Tibetan cultural characteristics. But how does it relate to other forms of Buddhism in China? What are the relations objectively? So is there contact between different kind of Buddhism in China? And is there something specific that Tibetan Buddhism offers in the Chinese environment that is different from other forms of Buddhism?
Originally, Buddhism was actually a religion from India. Then, when it was introduced into the Han regions, it fit the culture of the Han people, and thus it ultimately became Han Buddhism. Historically, it entered the Tibetan region about 1,300 years ago. When it gradually merged with Tibetan culture and traditions, it became Tibetan Buddhism, as it is known today. All lead to the same end by different ways. There are no differences in the main aspects. They all recognize Buddhahood, all recognize the need to protect and love all sentient beings. There is no difference in these fundamental principles. However, when it comes to certain so-called Tibetan Buddhist traditions, including the use of debate as a method of discernment, in these aspects, Tibet has many practices that are simply not found in Han Buddhism today anymore. In terms of the emphasis on studying theory, exploration of concepts, I personally honestly believe that Tibetan Buddhism possesses a unique quality, something different from other religions, distinct from Han Buddhism. In theoretical exploration, as you can see, it has some particular advantages.
We speak very easily about religion and say Buddhism is a religion, like Christianity is a religion, Islam is a religion. Would you really think that Buddhism is a religion? Or some people have been arguing it is a philosophy, because the gods are not that important in it. like for example in Christianity or in Islam. How would you position yourself towards that question of is Buddhism a religion or a philosophy?
This is my own view of Buddhism, personally speaking, because it truly is, in fact, one of the world's 4 major religions. If we say it is not a religion, that wouldn't be reasonable either, because of its rich and elaborate rituals and ceremonies, and its distinguished, influential religious figures. For example, among us who are ordained, there are also many different and distinct levels, with various types of levels, including the wearing of different religious garments, all of which exist. I also personally believe, quite honestly, that it is in many ways a kind of philosophy. Why is that? Because it is not just a purely religious ideology. It is not just a simple secular law, as many people might at first imagine or believe. Rather, what may seem like a straightforward rule is often more complex than it appears. And the reality behind it, having studied it myself for such a long time, from the perspective of Buddhist doctrine, it can be said to be like an encyclopedia in many ways. Even talking about Tibetan Buddhism, it covers astronomy, geography, as well as anthropology and sociology, including areas such as the field of modern psychology, among others, and so on. All of these, within Buddhism as a whole, not only can we find their theoretical foundations, at the same time, for any field of knowledge, there are also profound explorations. So nowadays, in the world, when strange and unusual things happen, personally, I don't find any of, because indeed there are very clear explanations in Buddhism. Therefore, I believe that it is both a religion and a philosophy within a certain scope. If we look at it, strictly speaking, in a narrow sense, it is not simply a religion, nor is it merely the so-called ancient Greek philosophy or some narrow Eastern schools of thought, or just a religion. It should be considered alongside other religions and philosophies. You could say it is an integration of both. This kind of pedagogy.
I want now to proceed a little bit to the questions of Buddhism and modernity. In China, there was a famous leader, Buddhist leader, Taisu, who tried to develop an engaged Buddhism. And in Sri Lankan Buddhism, you had Dhammapala doing basically the same. I think, or as far as I understood it, you also are in favor of an engaged Buddhism, a modern Buddhism. So what tradition in Tibetan Buddhism is there to promote this idea of modern Buddhism? And what kind of criticism from other parts of Buddhist leaders is there to be found against that idea?
Is what I personally absolutely and truly believe. Buddhism should be understood with thoughtfulness and respect, or disseminated in an appropriate manner. Understanding or spreading. On one hand, it is quite traditional in nature and rooted in long-standing customs. Most profound and authentic principles should not be greatly altered due to changes in the times or trends, and has been significantly and noticeably changed. Nowadays, there are some individuals who do not truly understand the profound theories and practices of Buddhism. So they interpret it entirely from a secular perspective and explain from their own feelings. Such secularization or modernization, I do not really accept, because it is in itself something profound, but ordinary people don't understand it. So they use clear and simple language to describe it. The second aspect is Buddhism should be viewed from the perspective of people's everyday lives. When viewed in this way within Buddhism, it is completely and wholly based on the current concept of humanistic Buddhism as it is understood today. As for humanistic Buddhism, specifically speaking, at that time, Master Taishu along with many people from Tibet, including Master Fazul at the time, and others who were connected with them, Teng Parui of the US. He also introduced this in a book, the connections between Master Taishu and Tibetan Buddhism, and in the Han region, how to promote the principles of humanistic Buddhism. I myself very much recognize the tradition of humanistic Buddhism. However, with this tradition, we must, on the basis of preserving its original traditional essence, actively further promote it. Does Buddhism itself actually have a basis for spreading humanistic Buddhism? Yes, it does.
Avoid evil, do good. All good deeds should indeed be carried out if it's moral and uplifting.
Such theories and actions should all be actively and consistently promoted. For example, I have also personally established schools in my career. When disasters actually happen elsewhere, I also personally go there myself. We often provide financial support to some people. For instance, I have sponsored over 200 university students.
370 people in Klo Han.
We have now established a foundation using Buddhist principles to promote education among them. So modern secularization is indeed very necessary in our society today. Tibetan Buddhism, because its way of life has been integrated with Buddhist traditions from childhood, so it is actually considerably easier to promote in practice than Han Chinese Buddhism, because originally all Tibetan people from childhood to old age have made it a part of their daily life. It is not a separate religion, become a way of life.
But in a kind of practical sense, that is a difficult distinction to make, right? That following the precepts of canonical Buddhism would require people to step out of the world, to basically live in a monastery, do meditation, do the rituals, and come to a pure state of mind. Whereas engaging, like you are engaging now with me, traveling through the world and spreading your message, is disrupting that monastic practice, as it were, is disrupting that practice of meditation and so on. So where is the boundary? How can you still do the canonical Buddhism and interfere or intervene in modern society? It's not an easy thing to do, I think.
This so-called tradition, as we understand it, actually has two aspects. One is just the Buddhist, for example, the external aspect, such as living in monasteries and wearing monastic robes, as well as performing various Buddhist rituals and activities and so on. So what we actually mean is it is good for some to remain within monasteries because the external forms are actually an expression of the inner culture. Confucius also once said, once people forget rituals, and the culture behind those rituals will also be lost. So I believe some traditions within monasteries need not be abandoned. But the most important thing about what I just referred to as tradition really is that Buddhism itself contains profound meanings. Yet these meanings, if we try to express them with overly simplistic ideas today, I'm afraid it will be very difficult to bring them into the secular world. Now, as we enter society and the marketplace, for example, whether it's in various shops, wherever we go to spread Buddhism, this is a spirit in Buddhism. In Buddhism, just like the principle of truly benefiting all sentient beings for monastics or lay people, no matter what one's identity is, anyone can go out into society. It's not us. Now, even during the Buddha's time, the Buddha personally instructed his disciples to various places, including brothels and palaces, to spread the teachings everywhere. In fact, these teachings are a kind of philosophy and education. So I believe that without a doubt, secularization of Buddhism today If we can maintain the original meaning of Buddhism, there is no contradiction. If the traditional rituals are not abandoned, it can fully adapt to the ideas and concepts of every individual in contemporary society.
Now the question then becomes what the relation between Buddhism and modernity is. Many religions like Christianity, Islam, and other religions reject parts of modernity because they are traditional ways of thinking and ways of life, and they want to protect those traditional ideas, whereas then the modern secular world is seen as a threat. So what aspects of modern society or modern life is rejected in Tibetan Buddhism?
For us, because any religion ultimately exists in different periods of time, at various distinct moments, in different eras, people's daily habits, unique lifestyles, and personal preferences are constantly and continuously changing. During these changes, whether Buddhism or other religions, in order for it to survive, on the one hand, it must adapt to the society of its time. If it cannot adapt to the society of its time, it really is difficult for it to continue to exist. I truly believe that from the perspective of its core teachings and principles, it should be said that the truth of all things, indeed, there is a detailed exploration. This spirit of exploration in any era is impossible to change. I am not afraid that any scientific development will destroy the doctrines of Buddhism. However, when it comes to dedicated Buddhist practitioners using some modern secular methods, for example, the internet nowadays is very good for promoting Buddhism, but some Buddhists who often go online, in the process of going online, may lose their sense of direction sometimes. There are also simply two types of Tibetan Buddhism. One type is extremely conservative, including when it comes to some modern scientific products. They have very little contact with the outside world in all respects. There is another group of people who also maintain their original primary state, while at the same time accepting some modern ideas and concepts with principles of Western science. And as the words of some scientific experts have often stated, and they engage in discussions between these and Buddhist thought, there is such a group of people who share certain characteristics, and their presence is notable. Maybe there are three types. Another group who basically disregard the original traditions and follow the current Western romantic culture and secular trends, this secularization, and have basically abandoned their Buddhist identity, including among the ordained in Tibetan Buddhism, such as monks and nuns. Nowadays, some of them just feel that spiritual practice lacks meaning, so they simply become regular teachers in schools and study about Western culture. Three types of people. I personally feel I belong to the middle category, which is to study ancient cultural traditions while recognizing the current trends and ideas of both Eastern and Western cultures. Otherwise, it would probably be very difficult to integrate them. I've always believed that one should not be traditional, nor should one be too secularized. There should be a combination or merging in the middle of some sort, one that aligns with both modern and ancient principles. In my own view,
They like modernity.
we must respect ancient culture. I still attach great importance to it.
From the 19th century onwards, you have the major new ideologies in the world are liberalism, which is the basis of capitalism, and socialism, which is the basis of course, the Republic of China, Republic of Vietnam, and so on. So these are the two major modern ideologies, liberalism and socialism. From religious point of view, say for example the Catholic Church, or from Islamic point of view, these new ideologies are rejected. They are seen as materialistic, only about, say, money and about material aspects of life. Now, how is Tibetan Buddhism related to these modern philosophies?
Yes.
Now, when it comes to the important and often discussed topic of liberalization, in fact, the Buddha also said in the sutras, as it is written, that freedom is truly the ultimate source of all genuine happiness. So whether it is under the system of capitalism or under socialism, each person's sense of freedom and mental state is very important and should be protected. However, if we look at it from the perspective of traditional culture, that is to say, from the perspective of Buddhist culture, there is a basic standard for us as human beings, which is the line of moral norms. If we cross this line, in fact, in reality, freedom becomes an excessive state. This is what is called freedom turning into aimlessness. And there is such a saying, well, generally speaking, nowadays, when considering the importance of material and spiritual aspects from the original meaning of Tibetan Buddhism, there should be a balance, because the happiness and fulfillment of our mind are also very important. If we don't have it, then no matter how much material wealth we have in our lives, I'm afraid life will still have certain difficulties. Secondly, when it comes to external material things, they are also very important. Without them, if we rely solely on the mind, since humans exist in this world, we also need essential material resources, or perhaps their continued support. In this situation specifically, Tibetan Buddhism maintains a balance between material and spiritual civilization. There is indeed a careful balance to maintain. Neither should be neglected at any time. If one is favored over the other, it may not always necessarily bring benefits or improvements to life. So, from the perspective of Tibetan Buddhists, it is in fact important to note that I still care about so much the origins and significance of the inner mind and its importance. At the same time, we also have to pay attention to the impact of material things on people, the benefits and drawbacks that it inevitably brings to our daily lives. Analyzing from both perspectives carefully, Tibetan Buddhism should not lean toward either side, and that's how it should be in Tibetan philosophy. However, among people of Tibetan culture, there may also be various situations, just like some individuals in Catholicism and Christianity today. Some traditionally focus on practicing in remote mountains and are also against the external world. There are such cases. But there are also people who, in the cities, eagerly pursue material things while greatly neglecting the world of the mind. This phenomenon keeps occurring quite frequently as well. However, when it comes to our inner world and the external world, we should ultimately find a relatively reasonable balance. I personally believe this is very important.
One of the aspects of modern ways of thinking is gender equality. And one of the traditional ways of thinking is that there is a difference, a fundamental difference between men and women. And hierarchy, men are higher than women. So in the monastic traditions I have studied in India, these were all monks, Hindu monks. They would not allow women to become a nun. And that goes against, say, this modern ideology of equality. What is the Tibetan view of the role of man and women in religious practice and in religious organization?
In Mahayana Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism, it extends from there. In Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana and Theravada are combined.
It is this Buddhism, within this Buddhism, the concept of equality is especially suitable for modern people. Why do I say this? Because in Buddhism, like when it comes to monastics, both men and women in the Buddhist tradition throughout history can become monks or nuns. In terms of the precepts they generally observe, although women have a few more
Bhikkhuni precepts.
women have a few more precepts to follow. But what is the reason for these? We have actually studied this before. Our research, we found why were more precepts set for women than it might be because in daily life, including things like their restless mindset and afflictions, these aspects are just a bit more common. But later, during the research process, we discovered among people, although most women in general are the same as men, in some aspects, they may be more narrow-minded or have stronger jealousy. There are some differences in these areas. Apart from this, whether in terms of precepts or in their treatment, Buddhism is completely equal in every. Not only are men and women equal, but all sentient beings in their pursuit of happiness and avoidance of suffering are completely equal and have the same feelings. So Buddhism teaches complete equality in all beings. And Buddhism talks about equality.
Not all Buddhists are equal.
Because the abilities and interests of men and women and so on, this is not just among Buddhists, but among people worldwide. Generally speaking, in most cases, the abilities of men and women, including intelligence, do have certain differences. Looking at the world, whether it's national leaders from all walks of life or prize winners, in their view, if the numbers are the same, perhaps the contributions made to the world, there are probably more men than women. So I truly believe that within Buddhism, it is entirely appropriate to say there is equality. Since Buddhism teaches this, Tibetan Buddhism is a complete continuation of Indian Buddhism without distortion. And it is practiced this way.
Well, in India, the emphasis in the monastic tradition is that women have a reproductive function and actually cannot do the meditative practice. And I think, to be honest, that in Buddhism, there was a long time of rather marginal phenomena of nunneries and so on, that it is only a modern phenomenon to have more nuns in these traditions. So I'm just still not entirely convinced that there is this idea of equality. In India, there is no idea of equality, it's an idea of hierarchy. And in Catholicism, quite clearly, in Islam. So in all the major traditions is that you have that idea of a kind of hierarchy. So I would like to hear a little bit more about that.
I firmly and sincerely believe there should be no inequality whatsoever in Buddhism. Why is that, you might wonder? In Buddhism, men and women can both become monastics. Although Hinduism has this too, there are certain notable differences between Hinduism and Buddhism. India's primitive religions existed even before the emergence of Buddhism. Our Buddhism is not, in fact, entirely the same as Hinduism, either. Within Buddhism, among monastics, both men and women can become monastics. For example, at the Buddhist Institute where I am, there are about more than 2,000 male monastics, and in fact, over 4,000 female monastics. This is officially approved by the government within the institute. There are actually, at this time, more female monastics than male. Among the Han Chinese Buddhists I've encountered,
there are many women too. For lay people, the lay precepts.
Both men and women can receive the lay precepts. From the ancient teachings of Buddhism, there is no sign of discrimination or contempt against women, nor is there any specific rule actually forbidding them. There is absolutely nothing like that at all. It's just certain individual behaviors, or when you get into certain corners of society that traditions, Tibetan areas included, may have such situations. In the past, men were generally much more dominant and influential in most Tibetan households. He has a lot of power indeed. Women were generally considered to be relatively weak and often in many situations would serve them. Even if both men and women are Buddhist, this is a social tradition, not a tradition of Buddhism itself. Of course, the concept of equality nowadays is necessary. Some may stem from individual artificial behaviors, while others may come from folk traditions. But these traditions, I think, if we use the modernity of religion to promote equality now, there is indeed a need for it. However, in Buddhist doctrine, I always believe that there is no discrimination against women. There is no unequal treatment toward women. It's just that regarding certain images of women, there are some direct descriptions. But this does not simply constitute inequality. Other people in the world are treated the same way.
But now I would like to move a little bit to the question of Buddhism and science. In the major traditions in the 19th century have abandoned the claim to produce scientific knowledge. So knowledge is produced in laboratories, in the Max Planck Society, in universities, but the religions provide a kind of moral knowledge, a kind of morality, a kind of radar for people to help them to act in the world. So there's a kind of division between knowledge and morality. Now, to what extent does Tibetan Buddhism follow that same trend, abandoning the idea that religion actually provides knowledge about nature?
This, how modern science and Buddhism, I'm interested in this. I wrote a book on Buddhist science. It explores Buddhist perspectives and compares them with ideas from modern scientists, which have contributed in many significant ways to human society, combined all together for side-by-side comparison. As a dedicated and devoted practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, regarding the period since the 19th century, the dedication of scientists, whether it is their inventions or the truths they have discovered, should all absolutely and without exception be acknowledged. However, for those, especially in the scientific community, I personally and sincerely believe that the truths found within religion are deeply important, should not be denied either. Why is that? Because aside from science, in fact, within religion, there are also many truths that completely align with science. For example, in Tibetan Buddhism, there are specialized calendrical calculations. We do not use any scientific instruments, yet we can produce a calendar for the entire year, for every month. In our institute, we have a dedicated group of astronomy researchers. This astronomy group does not use any scientific instruments. I interviewed them the other day, 6 people in group. The 6 of them, over the course of nearly 2 months, through manual calculations, following the manual calculation methods from the Kalachakra Tantra Buddhist scripture to determine all the events for the coming year, 2014, solar and lunar eclipses. It covers all time and weather changes without using instruments. Our institute maintains this kind of practice, and this tradition has been passed down continuously over time. So I think that, as I see it, between science and religion, there must be a really mysterious relationship.
Are there any aspects of modern science that he would reject? Say, this is in other traditions, for example, the use of embryos for genetic engineering. this is a big moral issue in a number of religions, but there are a whole range of scientific discoveries and experiments that are rejected in various religious traditions. Is there any of that in Tibetan Buddhism? Is there any opposition against certain kinds of religious, scientific experimentation and?
From the perspective of traditional Tibetan Buddhism, some things in modern society, in our daily lives that are harmful to humanity. In fact, I am very worried. For example, nowadays, the killing of certain beings, because from the viewpoint of Tibetan Buddhism, all sentient beings indeed possess life, and all life is precious, whether it is human or animal, regardless of the type. The same principle applies. Regarding certain practices toward animals, such as certain dissection experiments, particularly in the field of biology, regarding the current acts of killing, including those in farmland, or certain specific actions toward animals, and the modern and highly scientific creation of destructive instruments, these are not highly praised in the teaching. At the same time, humanity today is facing many threats, including the current North Korea issue and nuclear issues. In fact, these are also created by humanity itself. So some scientists, with their peak intelligence, have instead brought us truly negative and very destructive consequences. If this kind of science falls into the hands of extremely domineering people, it is indeed very likely that just like during World War II, its destructive power was intense. But if it actually happens now, it could be even more serious, and the harm to humanity would be huge. So for reasons like these, in particular, Tibetan Buddhism doesn't praise what harms life or any creation that is harmful to humanity. Even science is not really very impressive.
So I think I more or less have come to the end of my questioning.
Professor Fan hopes you can ask him a few questions now.
I'm also really thinking about it. First of all, I'm indeed very glad that on an occasion such as today, to have direct face-to-face communication with Professor Fan, I think this is a rare opportunity. At the same time, I think personally, because I just arrived here only yesterday, not long ago, and I had seen in some materials before. The Max Planck Institute is a prestigious scientific research institution based in Germany, has produced so many renowned Nobel Prize winners over the years. But in some other countries and regions, there may not be so many people at this time. And even in an entire country, there are. So I've always had a question, why does such a small place has actually produced so many Nobel Prize winners? Really? Well, that's my first question.
Yeah, I think the reason for that is that Germany was the first modern industrial nation in the world. So at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, it is really the most progressed modern industrial nation. And in Germany, culturally, they have always emphasized very much science and knowledge. So there's an enormous respect, which is actually still till today, culturally for professors and for the whole idea of science. So that these two elements, so the material progress of Germany and the cultural emphasis on knowledge, which is, say, from at least Kant onwards, a major element of this culture. These two elements, I think, make that understandable.
Maybe with this question, I am perhaps just a bit hesitant, because a place that highly values culture and is the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, it's possible that in other places as well, there could be a similar reverence for knowledge and for culture like this, but I still have some doubts. What is the composition of this exactly? That in a short time, there are so many Nobel Prize winners. Is it because of this reverence, because human intelligence doesn't rely on others' help, could be related to geography, or maybe to some link between philosophers and this place? In China, we discuss feng shui. Does this relate to it? Do you have this saying?
Yeah, I think what Germans call culture or Kultur is very much this particular idea that there is an environment, that there is a people that lives in a particular kind of ecology, and that creates a kind of language and a set of habits. So from, say, Herder and Fichte, these philosophers onwards, there's a kind of idea of a relation between the landscape and the culture. So that would be very close to his way of thinking. But the fact of the matter is that Germany also created two world wars. And that after the Second World War, this particular place lost its luster. It moved somewhere else, and it moved to the new hegemonic or strong power in the world, to the United States. So then it goes to Harvard, it goes to Stanford, and all these ecologies are actually very different from Göttingen. So it doesn't really matter that much where ideas come from. But he has in fact a German idea about it. That's
Just now I heard that Professor Fan says, notably from an objective perspective. Generally, I know that in general scientists value objectivity, starting from and systematically researching objective issues in detail. But from the perspective of Buddhism or of religion in general, indeed, in this society, not only is objectivity key, but subjectivity is equally important. It plays a crucial and significant role as well. As a scientist who studies the world and seeks understanding, I am always curious. Objectivity serves as a key principle, but in our daily lives, there are things cannot be solved objectively, or that cannot be clearly explained objectively. These have existed in China and abroad. So how do you view this issue?
Yeah, I think for the humanities and my part of the social sciences, there is the same kind of combination of objective and subjective as proclaimed in Tibetan Buddhism. The idea is that you try to find knowledge and data that can also be seen by others. So it's not only claims about things that can only be seen by you. So there's a kind of need to universalize what you see, generalize it. But in anthropology, this is always still related to the observer. So there's always a subjective element in it. This is one of the biggest things in social sciences, that the social sciences try to develop objective methods, but that my particular discipline cannot go that far in that. Psychology, sociology have more developed these objective methods. In my case, we are closer to also other forms of knowledge in the sense that we have a combination of the subjective and the objective.
Another topic, I've definitely seen this before online, many introductions about Professor Fan. He has been involved in universities all over the world and among various world religions, playing a very significant role, making contributions to the world. I rejoice in this. At the same time, I also saw that in Shanghai, they have research and some projects on urban religious diversity. I'm not very clear about the main purpose of this project or what the recent progress has actually been. This kind of diversity, under what kind of impetus is it being promoted?
Yeah, the specific interesting problem in Shanghai is that Shanghai was an important place for Buddhism, Taoism, for Chinese religion till, say, 1949. And you would find temples and shrines and religious practices all over the town. You would find ancestor halls, communities around them, and so on. That has all been changed. And now it is very hard to find manifestations, public manifestations of religion in Shanghai. Now, so the research question I have is, where is this? And the question becomes a little bit more pregnant by the fact that Shanghai is now open for the last 20, 30 years, more and more open for immigration. So it grows very fast. So lots of people come also from his area and from other areas of China into Shanghai. So they bring their practices also in Shanghai. So where is it? That is actually the simple question. And we try to find out how people are continuing their religious practices in an environment in which you cannot publicly manifest it.
A rich, vibrant, and diverse religious culture, I personally believe it is truly very important because there are so many religions in the world. There is so much history. This is something that perhaps Seven, for any ruling party, its ideology has to continue on. That's the principle here. Meanwhile, I see that Mapu, such a historically significant research institute, do you have any projects related to Buddhism? By any chance, or have you included Buddhism in your research in any way? In other words, have you by any chance incorporated Buddhism into your studies? Perhaps Tibetan Buddhism is small, not always in Theravada. But what I want to ask is, to your knowledge, has the Mapu Institute ever conducted any research in this particular area before at any point? Will you promote work in this field in the future, or any projects being prepared or considered?
Well, we have right now a project on Taiwanese Buddhism, the Tzu Chi Foundation, and its activities in China. And we have Dan's work on Tibetan Buddhism in China. I would be very much in favor of doing more work on Buddhism, since I think right now there is too much work on Christianity in China. Christianity is seen as a problem in China, and therefore there's more research on it. Buddhism is not seen as a problem, and therefore there's little research on it. I do not believe that. I find it very interesting to see how, for example, Tibetan Buddhism, and specifically you and your organization, might spread in China, get more people following you in China. So I would be very much in favor of a project on studying how you go to Shanghai or to Beijing or to other places and engage with people who want to become Buddhists, with Chinese in general, how that all works. So, but we always need to have the support of the government to do that.
For example, at our Buddhist Academy, there are also many people present, and I am one of the monks. There are also others, including Khenpo Sodargye, many who are also very interested in science. They are knowledgeable in Tibetan and Chinese Buddhism, and are particularly well educated in their respective fields or areas of expertise. You could say it's been close to 20 years like this. So at a later point in time, we will proceed with the next steps as planned. When all favorable conditions come together, we should interact together. Because in terms of Buddhism, as we understand it on our side, in Tibet and in China as a whole, our Buddhist academy, Tibetan and Chinese Buddhism, or in other religious traditions, is known by everyone. This is not an exaggeration on my part, but when it comes to science, as well as sociology and anthropology, there may be perhaps some understanding. He has also been researching for nearly 20 years. He researches and has written many books. I also do research, but we rarely have the opportunity to sit face to face with many scientists in Beijing and elsewhere. We had more meetings with researchers, but if in the future all the right conditions come together at the right time, we will also provide even greater resources in all aspects, because we as a team are actually very interested in some of the most precious aspects of human society, the essence of wisdom from social sciences and from religion. Although there are some differences between them through research, we can in fact address these. Everyone is interested in this field because things in the world matter, but so does the mind. We really want to have discussions and exchanges across different fields.
No, I would be very much in favor of that. You can, of course, be in a way the middleman to make that possible. But I would personally very much enjoy visiting the academy and lecture and have exchanges with people. But definitely, I would very much enjoy seeing how Buddhism is developing in China. So I think we have common ground here, and I would enjoy having collaboration on these things.
There may be another issue, and this issue is also particularly important. Let's see, for example, Professor Yu Dan at the beginning. If we start by gradually interacting with the academy here because of ties to the government, is also very harmonious. Now, things are gradually progressing with a lot of academic exchanges and interactions. We hope that on our side, there are many Tibetan students, teachers, and notably professors, as well as many Han Chinese university students, including those studying abroad and there are especially many who have become monks over there. We very much look forward to Professor Fan personally coming to visit us in the future to gain first-hand insight and to communicate with the fellow intellectuals in the academy. We hope for it. And then my last question for you is, because I am a Tibetan Buddhist, Chinese Buddhism, etc. Many religions, but I am especially devoted to Tibetan culture and Tibetan Buddhism. I am deeply attached to it. I feel that this is something very precious. But now there are many, including some young Tibetans, they do not know just how truly precious it is. So I would like to ask a question. Professor Fan, could you please share with us what is your perspective on Tibetan Buddhism? Also, for young Tibetan intellectuals, do you have hopes for them, although you are not a scholar? As a social scientist, as a researcher regarding Tibetan Buddhism, I believe that for all of humanity, it is a very important treasury of thought. But what is your own perspective on this, really? Many young people nowadays, perhaps, including those who consider themselves very wise, have abandoned it, thinking that Tibetan Buddhism is useless, Tibetan culture is useless, and instead seek other kinds of knowledge for themselves. Do you perhaps have any hopes or advice for these people?
Yes, I think what you can very much in general say about the necessity of diversity is that there are very different forms of life and very different forms of ways of living that have to be known to mankind to be able to find solutions for a whole range of problems of which we do not even know now what kind of problems there will be. So a biologist will definitely say that the diversity of the realm of plants and animals is absolutely necessary for the survival or the continuation of the world. And a social scientist or a human scientist will say that a diversity of cultures is an absolutely necessity to be able to understand different ways of responding, as I said, to problems that we know now, but problems that we even do not know. So it's really very important to keep diversity of cultures available so that not everything becomes the same. Everyone wearing t-shirts, watching television, driving cars, going to a factory and so on. A number of these things are inevitable, I think. There will be definitely elements of economy that will spread to all parts of the world, but we are now speaking about culture and religion. And the diversity of culture and religion I see is a great good. So in that sense, Germans want to keep their own heritage, French want to keep their own heritage, and the Tibetans should invest in keeping their own heritage. So I think we are all in the same boat, in fact. And from a kind of objective point of view, this is actually a contribution to a more universal heritage problem. Well, thank you again for coming and for having this conversation with me. It's always a pleasure to look at you because you are a person who has humor and is always a good laugh and at the same time is thinking deeply about all kinds of problems. So it's really an enjoyment and a pleasure to have you here. And I also want to thank Dan for bringing you here.
Bandara Bandara